Hello, and welcome to this presentation. My name is Emma Kostopoulos. I am one of the graduate coordinators at the KU Writing Center, and today I'm going to talk to you about an important skill in writing up and presenting research, the abstract. Today, we're going to begin by defining what an abstract is and what it ideally does. Then we're going to discuss a specific strategy for presenting the information in the abstracts. Then we'll engage in an activity. And finally, we'll discuss how to revise and rework drafts of abstracts. So let's start from the beginning. How does one create an abstract? An abstract is, at its core, a brief piece of writing that appears at the beginning of a longer piece of research, such as an article. The abstract's job is to briefly present the argument of the piece, including the hypothesis and theoretical grounding, the methods, and the conclusions drawn from the research. The abstract is the means through which someone conducting their own research decides whether or not your work will be useful to them. Thus, one of the primary goals of the abstract is to convince readers to read the longer piece. You do this by making them understand how your research is important for the field, so you have to communicate what your research focuses on, why it is important to the field, and what implications it carries, and how the research was conducted, to prove it was done rigorously and ethically. It should be noted here that while there are some broad commonalities between abstracts, they are also tailored to the specific field of research they come from. So now that we know basically what an abstract is meant to do, how can we accomplish it? There's a specific method of organization that works very well to meet the goals of an abstract and communicate all relevant information to your reader. The CPR method, which in this case stands for context, problem, response. The first step is context, or explaining the situation surrounding the topic you're writing on. This means you have to assert why what you are writing is significant to the field and prove that there is a current scholarly discussion that you are contributing to. Then you have to present the specific problem that you're attempting to solve or address in your writing. Finally, you should present your response to the problem, the conclusions from your research that expand knowledge in some way. Let's address each step in greater detail. The context is, essentially, the reasoning and situation behind why you decided to write about this issue in the first place, and involves the current scholarly conversation that takes place on the broad topic that you are hoping to contribute to. Thus, when you think about the context, you need to think about several things, such as the shared assumptions about the topic in the scholarly community. What do people generally hold to be true? You also need to consider the knowledge that has already been established. What studies come before yours, and what do they prove? Are there methods for dealing with this knowledge that are privileged as being better and more rigorous? And finally, what are the foundational concepts, like terms and theories, that you're using to form your specific argument? In order to write in the first place, you had to have identified something worth looking at, a gap in the knowledge of the field, or an issue that needs resolution. You need to describe this problem for your readers so they understand the scope of the thing you are attempting to undertake. This could also be things like if you feel something is generally misunderstood or overlooked, if an idea or assumption hasn't been adequately tested, or if a method or idea needs to be improved in some way to keep up with the rigor of the rest of the conversation. The final piece to the abstract is your response to the problem. You must talk about how you addressed the issue you've identified and attempted to come to a solution. Your response also has to connect with the context in some way to demonstrate its relevance to the current scholarly conversation. How do your findings contribute? There are several qualities of high-performing abstracts. The first is conciseness. Abstracts are only a few hundred words long, and so you need to get your point across quickly and efficiently. Spending too much time on any one part of the abstract means that key points can get muddied or lost. This is an important consideration, since several of the other qualities deal with what the abstract needs to contain. There needs to be some description of the topic, so the reader gets an understanding of how you perceive of and approach the context and problem. There also needs to be explanation of the implications of your response. Why does your work improve the state of things? An abstract also needs to have a strong declaration. Readers should be able to clearly identify the main point and purpose of the writing. If the reader only had time to read your abstract and conclusion, they should still be able to identify the key points of your research. Finally, an abstract must have clarity. All of the points of the CPR method need to be very clearly identifiable. When writing your abstracts, there are some pieces of language that are common and sometimes expected. Most of these words deal with things that will be included in the bigger piece. You need to address your claim, your methods, your data, and your findings. But you also need to address how things are connected to the bigger field of research and how the literature has dealt with the issue up to this point. On this slide is an example of an abstract with the different parts of the CPR method differentiated. The context is italicized, the problem is underlined, and the response is bold. Consider that the response takes up the bulk of the abstract. This is because you must be upfront about your contribution to the literature. In some cases, the context may be a bit longer, but remember that your work must be front and center. Take a few minutes to pause the video and read through this example, then continue with the presentation. Turn now to the packet that was provided with this presentation. In this packet are several sample abstracts. Pause this video again and spend some time reading through these samples. While you're reading, identify where each abstract establishes its context, presents a problem, and offers a response. Now that you've read the abstracts, were we able to identify the CPR of each? And were some of them more effective than others? Instructors, pause this video and lead a discussion about each of the samples. After you've drafted a version of the abstract, you should spend some time revising. As you're reading the draft over, consider CPR. How much information does the reader need to know to get the ideas of your writing? Delete all digressions and tangents. Anything offset in parentheses is likely to be unnecessary. Also delete all unnecessary citations. You might need to drop a few names to settle the context, but you can't rely on the work of others, and you certainly shouldn't be quoting anyone. Make sure there's no repetition in the piece. Finally, consider using plural nouns instead of singular to make the work more general and easily accessed. You'll need to consider how to specifically tailor your abstract for the situation. Is this going in front of a paper for publication? Is this part of an application to present something or to get a grant? Furthermore, who is going to be reading this? Will it be experts in the field or a more generalized audience, such as students doing research for the first time? There are many ways to adapt an abstract. One of the main ways is to change the length. Often the situation you're writing for will have specific requirements. You can also change the types of terms you use. A lot of jargon won't do you any good if you're trying to get a general audience to read your work. In order to specifically adapt something for your audience, one of the primary things to think about is the language you're using. If you're writing for a field of experts, you can use more complex and specific language. You also need to think about what your keywords are going to be. These will be the words that will mean your article gets pulled up in a database search. Think about what you want to use based on the works of others. How are others describing things? What words are popular in reputable journals? So, some quick do's and don'ts based on this presentation. Remember to be concise, efficient, and direct in your writing. Use active verbs to convey the action of the sentences. Make sure your terms are familiar to your audience and appropriate for the topics, and explain any new terms you have to use. Make sure you do not use any sort of abbreviation or symbol without explanation. For that matter, no language a reader won't understand. Don't present your actual data in the abstract or include footnotes or quotations from other scholars. Finally, be sure your abstract is within the stated word count. So, what are some good next steps for this presentation? The first is to find abstracts in your field and read them as exemplars for your own work. They will show you specifically how stuff works in your discipline. Then begin brainstorming your abstract by thinking about how you'd pitch your work to someone who asks you about it in a professional setting. If you had to talk about it at a gathering, what would you say? Then copy and paste key sentences from this brainstorming into a document and build a draft around it. Make sure you revise after a full draft is completed. You can try a reverse outline, where you read the abstract and identify the main points in order of your writing. Do they match up with what you wanted to put forward? This concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching. If you have questions or want to make an appointment for a consultation, visit us at writing.ku.edu.